Yo, yo, yo.
Hey, what up?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Logical Plausible Probable After Show for the Sal, Cordova, and Dan debate to discuss some of their conversations about genetics, evolution, and genetic entropy, and the variety of topics that those guys all covered tonight at a very high level. So, I really enjoyed it. So far, we've got Jungle Jargon and Praise I Am That I Am. Guys, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show. What'd you guys Praise? Why don't you go first, buddy?
Yeah, I thought Sal actually redeemed himself from his last debate on Standing for Truth channel. I thought he did a great job defending his position and refuting his opponent's arguments. So I thought, yeah, well done. I was really impressed.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting how a lot of his opponent sounded good, but it was kind of interesting listening to some of his counterpoints. That he doesn't seem like he's that old, and I felt like I was listening to some of the standard talking points from the late '80s and '90s on some of the pretty cutting edge things that Sal was presenting as evidence for his position, as both from a entropy perspective as well as the major significance of the structural components. How about you, Jungle Jargon? What do you think?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was good, except I was a little bit distracted in the sidecheck. but yeah, I've been talking about directed working mechanisms for ages, and not only do you have the instruction component or the programming, you have the working functions that are the result of that. So
yeah, it was kind of interesting to me when when he was talking about Dan was talking about transposons and all those things, and I'm like, man, have you not read the papers where they're I read one earlier this week. I believe the number was they had found 11,000 currently active functional transposons. 11,000. That does not seem like an insignificant. Oh, this is just inert.
So this is information that's jumping around in the genome, right? And it's doing things, different things. Is that basically what it is?
Yeah. So they're actually their own components. Some of them are genes, some of them are regulatory components. But yeah, they literally move. And the thing is that it's often displayed as, oh, there's just this random deal that happens. No, the process that we're observing is a very structured one. So there's
it has to be. It has to be.
It's taken out. Okay, it's hanging out over here. Proteins come, grab it, move it down to another portion of the genome. They cut open the DNA where it needs to be placed.
Yeah.
Insert it, and then there's the equivalent of chemical welding that binds it back into that spot. And now, presto, the things that the sequences that are now actually, the irony is both upstream and downstream in some things they've noticed that transposon is now altering the outcome. And one of the things that I find the most interesting about that is they've discovered temporal control factors in this. So, like, hey, this transposon during embryo development does this. If we take it out, embryo dies.
Right.
But after it goes through development, said transposon is moved from the spot that had relevance in regards to embryo development and is moved and inserted into a new place, and now is executing a different outcome based on the new stage of life. And to me, I don't understand how you can remotely conclude that a time-based variable control is the result of environmental pressures and random mutation. Like that's a very calculated deal that this thing comes and goes as a unit and can make modifications. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Let's get real here. Is there any other scenario where if you witness that sort of control mechanism, you would conclude that was just a undirected occurrence? I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, that's mind-boggling. I mean, it can't be haphazard, that's for sure.
No,
So,
no.
I mean, are you talking about like algorithms, like it chooses to do something or whatever?
Well, I mean the choosing factor. I mean, yes, I mean, I think there's control factors that are going on in it, but I'm saying that um these transposons, based on their location, I mean, they have regulatory elements built in, or there's information like literal gene information as well sometimes. And now it might work in conjunction with another gene. So now it's basically create a super gene that is when it's inserted. Now, if the whole thing is read, it plus a gene that's in proximity to it, now they express an entirely different protein outcome when they're together.
Wow, that's incredible.
I mean, and those are the sorts of things to me, which one you hardly ever hear mentioned. I mean, there's papers on it, but I've never heard it in a formal academic discussion about the validity of evolution. And same type of variables occur with. Oh crap! I totally forgot to email Sal the link to this. Hang on. Same thing applies with microRNAs. I mean, you've got a microRNA that is executed separate from a gene, and then when you get to transcription, there's before transcription, this microRNA comes in, binds in a specific location on the microRNA, and now a new protein is the result. And they've also found that this occurs. Sometimes there's more than one microRNA that binds to this mRNA. So you've got gene A would be, if it's expressed without any of this, results in protein A. If it's if it's transcribed and translated into mRNA plus one microRNA, it's a different one. And if there's two, it's a different one. They've actually discovered that some of these outcomes, these microRNAs are changing this single gene sequence into hundreds, if not thousands, of different protein outcomes. And they've also discovered that these have this, just like the transposons I was talking about, they're discovering that these things also have, not all of them, but many of them have time-based variables as well. So, hey, it binds on these, it acts like this, it makes this modification during embryo development, different stages. And then, once it's matured, then it does a completely different function.
That seems extremely efficient to me.
I would say so. And I think one of the most interesting things, we got Sal coming to the house. What's up, Sal? Great job, man.
Sal. Congratulations.
Hey, guys.
Great job. Great job in your debate.
Thank you. Thank you. That was the best they had to offer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting, Sal. I felt like you were nice, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I really felt, I was telling the guys before you came in, that it felt like a lot of the standard talking points I felt like I was hearing from Dan. I felt like I was listening to some like 80s and 90s talking points when he was trying to counter some of your positions that are much more recent, shall we say.
Well, the thing is that people, I mean, he was really quick to say things and assert things and just like, oh my, how do I counter this? Because I'm more conservative in when I assert something is true. And he was just saying, no, I don't think the human genome's deteriorating. And just like, I don't know anyone that agrees with you, but I just like, how do I counter that? I mean, if I weren't such a nice guy, I might have pounced all over that. I said, I could have gone through and said, okay, here are all the researchers, but that's just really not my personality. And the other thing is, I think if someone's just too combative, you don't get debate. You won't be able to get people that are willing to debate you, because I was so nice to Ron Garrett. Dan Cardinale was willing to debate me. So it's just one of those things. But I mean, I don't know that I could ever in good conscience say that, I'm not worried about the genome not deteriorating. There's no one that thinks proving. And I don't know how to convey that. So,
something that actually, this is a question I've got for you, Sal.
yeah.
So in this is slightly off topic from what you were talking about tonight, but in regards to the supposed DNA similarities, are they comparing the introns as well as the exons, or only the exons in regards to what is counting as 99 point this, 65, all those different?
It depends. It depends on which study. And the other thing is something. By the way, I wanted to thank everyone that was supporting me there, because that chat was a total dumpster over there.
Usually
It was
is.
refreshing to see some of you guys root for me. So I can't thank you enough for supporting me, because this is the internet's not a nice place. But I'm hoping that at least a few people will start following my channel and my website. So and this is good practice. So to your question, our gene sequencing machines can't actually sequence repetitive elements that are very long. And I'm talking like, say, a few hundred at most. At best, maybe 700, and we're really pushing it, because there's certain things with chemistry when you have sequences that repeat for very, very long stretches.
Yeah, when you mean sequencing, you mean putting them into sequence?
Yeah, because basically what happens is we throw the cell into a gene sequencer, and it blows the genome apart, and we have to kind of piece it back together, thinking we pieced it back together correctly, meaning we'll just have all these fragments, and we're guessing this connects to that, and we can't have any guarantee that we did it correctly. And if they're repetitive elements, we have a really hard time estimating the length.
Okay,
And
so it's hard to even get the information, the programming information, the sequence, what it is.
If it's a repetitive element. So basically it might be just the same sequence over and over and over and over and over and over again. So that's very hard. And back to John's question, how similar are we? I think we actually are very, very similar. I don't think it's a good argument for creationists to say we're not, that we're very different from chimps. I think God made us deliberately similar to chimps. And that's, and the reason for that is so we could discover we're fearfully and wonderfully made, because I'll tell you what, you wouldn't want to be doing embryo research on human beings the way we do it with mice or these other creatures. You think, once I began to see that, I said, oh, I thank God we're so similar, so that we could do research on these creatures. Creationists have tended to try to argue we're not that similar. I don't think that's a good argument.
But
it's just
the reason I was asking that question, Sal, is because I personally don't have a problem if we are extraordinarily close. I really have an issue with that, personally. And I think especially the things we're discovering about the gene expression levels, especially in relation to cognitive development and cognitive function, there's massive differences.
Isn't that the hallmark of a designer, though, similarity? Like in computer programs, you have similar codes and such, There's actually computer programmers that say like the genome with the similarities actually shows design. Do you agree with that, Sal? Or?
Oh, yes. Oh, well. Oh, my goodness, yes. And it's, whereas humans think similarly because it's convenient to kind of, work off a template. God doesn't have to do that, but he did that for our good. The patterns of similarity and difference are helping us do structural biology, which is a total different topic. We can take the gene sequences, do an alignment, and we put it through a computer. It can do a 3D structure prediction. And this is like, well, wow. That's like God put a secret code in there that only 21st century computers could find. And it's going to benefit the pharmaceutical industry. It didn't have to be there. So what I mean by that is, what if God made all of our genes identical, totally identical between creatures? We wouldn't be able to do stuff like that. But it's perfectly designed, just enough difference and enough similarity to help us do biology, so we can learn we're fearfully and wonderfully made. But this is some really cutting edge stuff that is hard to describe.
Yeah, well, my reason for pointing out the differences between the genomes is the fact that they keep trying to pin us down on what a kind is, and I'm just saying that a kind would be just a copy of its ancestors, and that the copy is not going to have the same information between one kind and another.
I wanted to point out something. You'll rarely hear me ever argue kinds. I said it's not relevant. And my friend Walter Riemann was the co-founder of Baraminology. There was a big split. Oh, it was really bitter between Walter Riemann and the rest of the baraminologists. And he was like the co-founder. He did not like the direction that it's been going. So when evolutionists say, well, what are the kinds? I said, that's irrelevant. The question is, can we evolve certain organs? See, it ends up being a red herring. So even though creationists are fascinated with kinds, evolutionists would prefer that you argue kinds, because a lot of the way that they frame things are red herrings.
Yeah.
And I recognize that, because they would prefer to talk about things in order to avoid difficulties with the theory. And getting creationists to talk about kinds kind of puts us on the defensive, whereas I wanted to say, well, how does a bacteria evolve into a yeast? Just really, go on the offensive. That's what I do. So I don't even talk about kinds. It's not. Incidentally, John Sanford doesn't study baraminology at all.
Wouldn't that be a different kind between bacteria to a yeast?
Yeah, exactly. It's just and they'll say, well, how about the yeast? There are all these species of yeast, or those individual kinds. I say it doesn't matter. You can't evolve one to the other. So what if there are all these different kinds of yeast? But that's where they'll try to get you down, is pin exactly what is specifically a kind.
Yeah.
I prefer to say these are classes.
Yeah, I mean, with more, we have to know exactly what's written in a genome to be able to compare the different living organisms, to know that they're different kind or not a different kind. I think it takes more study. But yeah, you're right. It would be better just to pin them down on, obviously different kinds.
What I do, I actually I don't use creationist terms. I use evolutionary terms or standard terms. I say, how does a eukaryote evolve from a prokaryote? They understand that language, because they would rather try to frame it in terms of creationist kinds. I'll say, I'm going to frame it in your language, and you tell me how it evolved. Because I'll tell you why they want to talk about kinds. Because if I started framing it in their language, they know where I'm headed, because they know there's serious problems in some of the transitions, especially at the lower part of the tree.
Well, it might be just that we don't know what their language is,
Well, the interesting thing is, I mentioned the Ivy League creationist. One of them's Changed Tan, Harvard postdoc. She and I work. The reason she became a creationist, she was an atheist and became a Christian. The reason she became a creationist is she started teaching molecular biology and seeing the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. That was the end of her time as an evolutionist.
Yeah, that's a big jump, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Something I was actually pondering yesterday, Sal, it kind of relates to what you're talking about on the prokaryote to eukaryote, as well as I think it extenuates all the way up the tree of, okay, especially when you get to mammals, right? You've got sperm egg, right? The mutation has to have occurred in the DNA in either the egg or the sperm cell, right? And it has to be the egg or the sperm that has the mutation that is the one that fertilizes and results in, obviously, the offspring. So to me, when you really kind of think about that, of the narrowing of the odds, so to speak, you've run into a significant barrier, in my opinion, of like the actual plausibility of there being the likelihood that the number of mutations required to end up in just the functional genes becomes pretty far out there from a plausible explanation. And that's before you even account for the fact that they have to be in the correct order. And we're just talking about the sheer numbers of them. And then the other part that I've been thinking about too is, okay, cool. So the right the right change happened to especially in like building of new genes, right? Okay, change 1 happened, but 1,000 base pairs to the left, one that was correct has also changed and is now incorrect. So you got a correct change on the right and an incorrect on the left. You're at a sum 0 in terms of progress towards the next beneficial outcome. And I feel like the evolutionists kind of skip over some of that basic logic. And, oh no, it just happened. Like, really?
Yeah, exactly.
They all kept happening at the same time? Like, and the ones that were correct never went back or had an error? I mean, to me, those kind of things are some pretty basic common sense, but it didn't. I've hardly ever heard that premise be addressed. Have you?
Oh no, they don't address things. They just they have a way of obfuscating, and one of the challenges, like tonight, Dan just kept talking more and more technical terms, and just like he's trying to outgeek me, and the audience, which I was hoping the audience was starting to get a few things. I don't know how well I was connecting, because he could just keep throwing up these theories. I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'd never feel comfortable throwing that out, but it's like I wasn't in a position to critique it. So,
well, in my opinion, if you go up in your round 2, I would say you do, because people like him, it's their standard modus operandi. Will just keep coming at you with stuff they know a very low percentage of the people are going to actually understand in the audience, and until you like punch back and then force them to actually address a hard question themselves, they oftentimes try to rule the show. Tell me about that praise. You've never experienced that before with any of the nuts we've gone up against, have you?
I mean, he was let me say this. He was very effective in, I said, do you think the human genome is improving? And he was very good at being able to give a non-answer. I'm just like, oh my goodness.
He did address that. I agree.
Yeah, real quick, guys. Since we get somebody new just joined us, we got Steve. Steve, are you General Ballsack? We can't hear you, bro.
I am.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming over to the show. You got any?
Yeah, and I actually wanted to address what Salvador was and yourself there, Logical, were kind of putting forward. I'm a layman when it comes to biology, DNA, things like that. I'm a Christian myself. At least I consider myself culturally a Christian. I'm a theist as well, but I'm not necessarily a creationist, and I have a lot of difficulty, especially with the entropy argument, to fight through the science to make that leap between what's understood and what we can scientifically understand. And again, as a layman, what we understand scientifically and making the jump to essentially accepting the Bible literally. I think that's one of the biggest issues I have, and I give atheists crap on a lot of things too. So I mean, I'm against pretty much both sides on that thing. So I mean,
well, I mean, my first response to that would be, and I appreciate you being honest about like not having a ton of knowledge of biology. One of the things I would say first is I would recommend going and doing a little bit of research, like head over to Standing for Truth channel and watch one of the many videos where they break down a lot of the standard evolution talking points. And when you actually start to look at the direct contradictions that are, I mean, when you look at it rather than the argument from authority, all the scientists agree on this. And then you actually go and look and you find out, A, there's a lot of controversy, and B, a significant portion of the talking points that you're probably hearing on YouTube and the debates and such, the vast majority of them have been completely debunked. And a lot of these people are still arguing like it's 1980s. I mean, people that are still espousing Dawkins and the selfish gene premise and single gene importance and all that stuff, which it still is. It's obviously important in one context, but the fundamental basis of the argument that all that's required is modifications to genes is in order to result in these massive outcome differences. I mean, that's just getting debunked left and right. And there's papers you can go read published in Nature and other locations where people are making this exact, what I'm relaying now, they're doing it from a science, a peer review standpoint and arguing they're going all the way to the extent of, hey, we need to abandon modern synthesis and look for something new. So the point I'm making is, if that's going on in the academic circles, then obviously the supposed proof that creationists are just, refusing to accept is, that argument is losing a heck of a lot of steam on a variety of fronts, both on our side, on the ID side that's presenting, significant evidence in their favor of, intelligent design. And then on the other side, you got the Darwinian model that's starting to collapse in many ways.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, Steve, thank you very much for joining us and showing such curiosity. Something that's a passion of mine is that I think a lot of people without formal biology training can actually learn a lot without having to go through 4 years of school. The schools are designed when they had the curriculum to train people to be chemists, biologists, or medical doctors, or pharmacists, or whatever. They're not designed to teach people about creation. If the goal were to teach enough biology so people can understand the debate, I don't think they need anywhere near like 4 years of college education. I think even in a week they could get a lot if they're willing to devote themselves. So one of my passions is to try to build a curriculum that people can go through if they're willing to go through it. And I would hope that they would study this because they could see just also how beautiful God made everything. Whether one believes it evolved, God used evolution or an act of special creation. I think as we study things, it'll make us wonder. But by the way, what's your background, Steve? What do you do?
I currently work in an office job, but I'm formerly military, several jobs there, and mostly what I would say my intellectual curiosity is towards history and foreign relations and things like that. But I was raised as a Christian, a Lutheran, essentially, and I haven't rejected any of that either. That's something that I would like to establish as we continue.
Well, first off, thank you for your service. And want to express my appreciation for that. I'm presuming that's the U.S. military. And
I hope it was too. Yes, go ahead. Don't worry about it, though. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Did you get to see the debate?
Yes, I was there. I was actually the one that asked the question about when entropy actually occurred within human history. That was and that's one of the issues I have with a lot of the entropy argument. From my perspective, is I don't understand where this degrading of humanity comes from, and it sounded like you had already established up front that you didn't like, or you. I don't want to say you didn't like the argument, but you were hoping that you would be wrong about that argument.
As far, there are a couple of things. It's very hard to use the entropy argument to make the case for special creation. I would use a different argument. The argument is that, and actually, your question caught. I didn't quite understand the question. I answered it to the best of my ability, but now that you're here, maybe you can give me a second chance if that's okay. And so maybe you'll get your money's worth this time. I think the reason I would say about 6,500 years ago, or at least sometimes it's very hard to establish dates. We can make some estimates, but I would say that there had to be a point when humans were just made just right all at once, because just a lot of things, we'd be dead if it weren't. And so there parts of our body that we can kind of sacrifice slowly, but it wouldn't be great. Like, I mean, we can lose some limbs or fingers or whatever, but it's not going to be great. And it's very hard to say when we would actually go extinct, but we do have evidence from records of bones of people a few thousand years ago. They had bigger brains, they had stronger bones, which implies they had stronger muscles. So that's about as far back as we can go if we're talking about human fossils. So I personally believe there was a miracle that happened about 6,500 years ago, and the humans had to be a lot healthier. So I don't think we have enough data to establish it from a scientific standpoint. So some of that's more of a faith issue. I wouldn't know how to actually answer your question. So maybe that's about all I could say.
I definitely agree with you on the one point, is that there is not enough information that we have about really human development or how evolution specifically functions. I mean, there's theories out there. I personally have difficulty with macro evolution. I'm by no means a young Earth creationist at all. I do believe in the age of the universe and things like that, just to establish. But I suppose the issue that I always have is that we continue to say certain things that are just they I mean, we even as a general theist, not considering the cultural side of things, because I think that a lot of the way that I perceive God is through cultural lens, because I do look at the way that I perceive God as what I consider God as intellectually, two different things. I'm going off on a tangent. Hopefully you're kind of tracking where I'm going here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
I had a question. What do you think about the destiny of the human race? I mean, do you have any opinion if we're getting better or worse? And did you think he made a good argument that we're not getting worse? I wanted to find out how well you thought I argued my points.
I had a lot of trouble following his argument, because he did, as you were stating earlier, he was going into really deep biological DNA types of things, and that's not my forte whatsoever. So again, I'm a very layman when it comes to those kind of things.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. You see, I wanted to say sometimes when one doesn't have a good argument, one can throw up a smokescreen of things no one understands what you're saying. You just have to sound like you know what you're talking about. And he does know a lot. And I just like, oh my goodness, it could almost be convincing to some people that we're not getting worse. And, it's just like, if I had been in that position, I would have folded. Because he's basically disagreeing with his own community. I don't know of any major evolutionary biologist that thinks we're getting better, but he just stuck by his guns and said, he rejects that idea. I'm just like, I don't know.
Well, if the entire point of the debate is for you to defend the position, then he's not going to. I personally think either, obviously, as Sal, as you know, I'm not an expert, but I'm by no means a layman when it comes to genetics. Yeah. And when I was sitting there listening to him, I sat on my porch with my laptop, and I mean, I was sitting there just being like, "You got to be kidding me!" With some of the things he was spewing out, I'm like, I know beyond all doubt, because I literally just read a paper on this, that there is direct contradiction within the last year of position A, position B, position C that he was putting forth with supreme confidence. And I'm kind of like, do you not know this, or you just know if you admit this that your entire argument collapses? There's only two options in terms of his responses.
I wanted to see. I tried my best when I showed the picture of Einstein and what's his name, Lloyd Christmas. I was trying to connect. I said, I hope the audience is starting to realize just how terrible their definition of fitness is. I mean, making more babies doesn't necessarily mean your genome is really improved in the functional sense. And that's something he didn't want to give away.
I mean, I think when you look at, I mean, you kind of briefly mentioned this towards the end, but I mean, you just look at autism, for example. I think it was in the 1990s. And I remember this because I was a kid, and I remember seeing the stuff on the wall at the doctor one time that it was like 1 in 150 children were born with autism back then. And last year, I saw another update, and it was 1 in 50 were being born with autism. That is a massive, massive increase. Now, in context of and this goes back to the whole, is the non-coding regions of the genome have relevance? Well, guess what, folks? They've started to identify different components in the non-coding regions that they're directly tying to autism. So that's among the many other things that they're discovering, especially in regards to cognitive function, that are directly they're directly attributing to non-coding regions. So if that is what is being discovered, but you're going to cling to the argument that the non-coding has no real relevance, then, I mean, like I said before, you're either living in denial and denying the facts, or you're trying to hide from the blaringly obvious degradation of the genome overall.
And he was saying, well, we found out new medical ways to keep people alive. I said, I wanted to say that's not the point. We can get children with juvenile diabetes now. We can get them to survive, but the point is we're not clearing out the problems. And I didn't know how to communicate that. I was having I was having a hard time, and just like, do you not get it? I mean, maybe he gets it, but he's just, it was tough. It was tough. It wasn't that I didn't have the facts. It's just like, I just don't know how to deal with his counters when he's just sticking to his guns like that. There's a picture of what they say, the debate opponent that you don't ever want to face is someone who's like he's a rock. He will not back down from his position, even when you show him. I'm just like, I don't know what to do with him,
Yeah, people. How old is he? Probably early 30s.
Yeah.
I really wonder if he is part of that segment that has been so from childhood. It's been such an aggressive push to believe all of these components that now there's a desperation to prove them. And because I see that quite a bit in stuff that I watch and papers that I read and different things like that. And I'm pouring through it and looking at the, what's being discovered. And it's like every new paper I read, it just cracks. It's like they're literally outlining a new component that's been discovered that directly contradicts their previous 100% true position. And I'm like, if you keep finding these things, at what point do you also concede that you were incorrect, rather than in the final paragraph of your conclusion saying, well, it's still yet to be discovered how this could be accounted for by evolution. I mean, that's your close, is because I mean, these at the front end, they have to know. And then I think they're convincing themselves at the end that this couldn't possibly be what they're discovering couldn't possibly be. There must be some additional variable that explains, and we'll fit this back into our core model.
I mean, there are times it's like I threw a punch and the guy didn't even move. I'm like, I just gave you. He said 11% of the genome is functional. I said that translates to 80 megabytes, and I can't believe how many people will just stick to that. I'm just like, as someone with a computer or engineering background would be like, that's absurd. 80 megabytes to code a brain.
What's that? Before you, and I know I've been running my mouth here, so anybody else has questions, feel free to hop in. One of the things that I find so fascinating about those kinds of arguments, like the 80 megabytes and such, I'm like, one, to your point, do you actually think something this complicated could possibly fit into that small of a file? Number one, but number two, you're counting this data from only one read of it, one way to read the data. And if you're only looking at it from, oh, well, the only data here is the sequence from A to B, and you ignore the fact that the same data can be read 100 different ways with 100 different outcomes, you just refuse to account for literally 100 times the amount of data that is housed in this this thing that you're saying doesn't have any data, or only has this minimal amount of bytes in it. And that's what always gets me when you really start looking at the variability options, and especially with proteins. I mean, it's like, are you ignoring this? This to your point, with anybody with a modicum of engineering, computer science, information technology knowledge at all would recognize that in a split second of like, are you an idiot? How can you not understand this?
And I mean, I'm just like, it didn't faze him. I'm just like, I just remember some of these boxing matches where the guy was just getting his head pummeled and he just stood there just like, why doesn't he fall down? You know, that's what it felt like. And I'm just like, I didn't know what to do with this guy. So, I mean, he was polite, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. I mean, I'm just putting myself in his position. It's like, I wouldn't defend that. I wouldn't, I try to defend points where I have at least some peer-reviewed literature, but when he said he disagrees with he said that's an argument from authority. I'm just like, oh my goodness. I mean, when he's calling his own people and saying, yeah, that's an argument from authority, I don't agree with my colleagues. I'm just like, oh,
Sometimes
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
sometimes I wonder if they're understanding what we say. Sometimes it's just like goes right over their head. Not to say that they don't understand, but they're just not paying attention to what we're saying or something.
Yeah, I mean, I told him, I said, I don't know any geneticist that thinks we're improving. And he said, yeah, you cited a lot of people, and, that's just an argument from authority. I don't buy it. I'm just like, well, what evidence do you have that we're getting better? I mean, I didn't know, and when I tried to throw that on the table, he just sort of talked about other things. I say, he didn't give me a straight answer. I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this.
Steve, go ahead, man. Ask your question. Do you have something you want to say?
Give me a moment.
Okay. Well, you're thinking a quick follow up on that. So the argument he was making about, with 7 billion people, we've had all the point mutations possible. I'm like, okay, if we're improving, and we have, because I follow your logic on this one, because I'm pretty sure that they say the grand total of Neanderthals that could have possibly lived is like 6 million. So I'm like, okay, that's not very many options for mutations, number one. But in context of fast forward to now, if all of these improvements in this evolutionary process is controlled by the number of chances, and per your argument, his argument, we've gone through all the variations. Why the heck have we not changed? Like, you would think if the human population was like right around 1 billion 150 years ago, and now we're at 7, we've got more people on the planet right now than arguably have lived in the history of humanity. So why are we, if we were able to see all these massive improvements and changes in 200,000 years, how is it remotely, as I'd love to say in my standard spiel, how is it logical, plausible, and probable that with a minuscule number of variables in terms of a smaller population, that it resulted in all of these major changes? Why, now that we have 7 billion, actually, like 7.3 4, something like that now. How are we not seeing massive changes now? If you're gonna, they're gonna try and make that argument. Let's see.
I was just also looking at some of the chats here, and again, I'd like to thank all of our the people that showed up to the debate and offered their support, and I appreciate what you guys are coming out and hearing us. So that argument where he was saying there's 7 billion people, we've sampled the genome, just like, oh my God, that's so terrible. I don't know. Someone gives you something that's just so bad, you don't know what to say.
Yeah. So, Steve, I talked to you for a minute. Did you think of your question?
Yeah. I guess again, this kind of comes back to the entropy argument still a little bit. I mean, we've developed as a species, even in the historical record, not to be so concerned about basic survival, even against other humans, to a certain degree. You, Salvador, work on biology. You're not a generalist. You don't think about whether you're going to go out and be able to get food. You don't have to worry about if someone's going to attack your house or anything like that. And as you look for a mate of whatever variation you might, that's not a concern for you anymore. We've diversed into a position where we don't have to fear about the basic necessities for the most part. Obviously, there's parts of the world that do still have to consider those things. So I don't know if the entropy argument works historically in the sense that we have different priorities now. We don't have the same hierarchy of needs that we used to have. And I know I'm coming from a historical perspective rather than a genetic perspective, and I know that's not your forte and all that. But I guess that's where my major issue with that argument is.
Your major issue with the genetic entropy argument, or
yeah, essentially that we're not developing necessarily as. I mean, we're definitely, as an individual, I'm smarter than someone that was born in the 5th century. I mean, that's obvious. Because, I mean, I got different ways of producing that intelligence. I've got a more focused way of surviving than I would have in the 5th century. I don't have to worry about barbarians coming up to my doorstep. I don't have to worry about being a huge bruiser to be able to do that, or working in a field. So do you not think that there's been a reason why we've moved to genetically the way that we are now, where, yeah, we got a lot of dumbasses around there. We got a lot of Lloyd Christmases, but we don't necessarily have the same concerns as folks did,
Yes, I think
a millennia ago.
And this is what I was trying to argue, is that when we try to adapt to the environment, sometimes we lose capabilities. That paper I cited where people are losing their intelligence, it's actually saying natural selection is making people dumber. Because if you think about it, someone who's really smart and studious, he's going to be spending a lot of time in the libraries and reading books. He's not going to be out there trying to raise a family, because it's a lot of sacrifice to develop someone's brain. And I mean, this is somewhat known that the higher the intelligence, the lower the reproductive rate. I don't know exactly why that is. We could speculate, but that's kind of a known thing. And
let me interject here for a second. So, Steve, I would actually disagree with you on you necessarily being smarter from an IQ perspective than somebody in the 5th century. There's been quite a few studies just in this past century that have shown rather significant decline in IQs rather than increase. And when you look at things from a capacity perspective, we just look at the degradation of cognitive function just in relation to modern technology, for example. So there's been studies on this of how smartphones and instant access to information on the internet is literally causing brains to not structure in the same format as they used to, and are having dramatic impacts on short-term memory, long-term memory, and analytical abilities in terms of actual brain structure. And so when you think about that in the context of, the capacity has been there in previous times, but now it's starting to decline. And technology is a major component of this. But when you think about what back in the 5th century, I would actually argue you would have to be smarter to survive back then than you do now.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between intelligence and learning. We have a lot of learning, but we don't necessarily have the same intelligence.
Yeah, huge difference between knowledge and IQ. It's about being able to apply the knowledge. And the old, like the time travel movies. The genius from 300 years ago comes to the future, and he's rapidly able to figure things out and starts running the show. Well, I mean, they're obviously usually those movies are done in comedy or in jest, but I've actually contemplated this quite a bit. I actually wouldn't surprise me if that could be, if that actually was if that could happen, if that would actually be the realistic outcome of all that stuff, just from just a basic, how easy do you guys have it? Perspective, and then being able to apply that, both the intellect as well as the much less lazy perspective on life in general.
There are parts of his argument that dealt with the back mutation. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Someone on the internet told me they dinged Dan on that. And I said, there's no way that he's going to reuse that argument. And he did. I'm just like, I better, I have to look at this. I said, I couldn't believe he appealed to it. He's basically saying that if we have some bad mutations, we'll just keep mutating and we'll get some of them back. I'm just like, no, that's not a really good argument. And he was talking about equilibrium, just like, where did this? I was just like, where are you pulling this from? I mean,
so Praise, I got a question for you, man. Because you analyze this stuff at a high level. What was your read on Dan's his mindset? Did you get any vibes on the way he was approaching the debate?
Yeah, I think that he was engaging in evasion, trying to evade Sal's arguments, and he would try to thwart it with some of these technical things. I really didn't understand his arguments, but I know Sal did though. And the co-option, I thought the co-option thing was hilarious. And then Sal goes, "Yeah, they're circular. It's a circular argument." Great, that's well said, Sal. Exactly. So I think he was trying. I think he was more interested in trying to win the debate more than trying to be honest. I mean, that's the way it is usually, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I want to credit him for he tried to be very civil to me, and I appreciated that. I think I was just stunned. I'm just like, dude. I mean, do you have rocks in your head? I just punched you with my hardest punch, and you just didn't move. And
technically, I wanted to make this point too. There is no such thing as an argument from authority fallacy. The only time it becomes a fallacy is where you make a claim that just because the authorities say something is true. But you can appeal to authorities to show the legitimacy of your argument.
Yeah. Call Me Emo asked about arthropods. I want to at least. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say real quick, Praise in line with what you're saying there. I find it hysterical how when it's reversed, then the argument from authority, and all we hear is, 97% or 99% or whatever, think this is true. So until they change their mind, then you're just the one that's the outlier and you're out to lunch. And then if it's reversed on them on something they disagree with, then they want to deny and claim that you're doing a bandwagon fallacy. I think is the other term for that. And
Right.
I'm like, so are we having like a good for the goose, good for the gander argument here? Like, what's the what are we saying here? But
Good old confirmation bias. Yep.
Yep. So you were talking about a question from Emo.
Yeah, he was asking about genetic entropy in arthropods. I don't think that we have. I think it's very early in the game, and to be extending it, even though people, I mean, John thinks it's extensible. My role is to actually find evidence, because when he wrote his book in 2005, we didn't have any of the stuff that I talked about tonight, where I was talking like 4D nucleome. And each year John says, wow, this is amazing. These are all more functions. It's just going to be worse. And I'm just like, yeah, the more function we find. So we have good data on humans. We don't have a lot of stuff on the arthropods. The reason is because humans are us, we've thrown billions of dollars at this question for humans. We've hardly studied any other creature except like mice. Mice is the next thing we've studied really carefully. So, and one thing that, because I'm very cautious with my words. I don't want to just jump out and say something, but he was framing genetic entropy in terms of extinction, but I'm just like, it's really bad if you're getting sick. That's not, you don't have to be extinct to have loss of function. If you're more prone to getting, like autism or any of these immune disorders or anything else, it's like, that's not good. That's deterioration. So I just didn't have time to contest him on that. But, I don't know. This is kind of a new experience for me because he was definitely a lot more educated and smarter than anyone I've debated, because most of the time I debate idiots, but this guy's smart. And it's like he didn't know when I threw a pretty good punch. He just took it.
Steve, are you about to say something?
Oh yeah, I was just saying that was funny. You just took the punches like a rock, and I think that's what a lot of folks that are open-minded tend to do. They essentially discount your argument right off the bat without actually thinking through it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I don't know how, I don't know how I could make a better argument than saying 100% of your peers don't think we're improving. 0%. I mean, 0% think we're improving. 100% think we're degenerating. I don't know how I can make a stronger argument. I mean,
yeah, it's interesting, Sal. One of the you and I haven't really talked about this too much, but just the recent discoveries on the relevance of the short tandem repeats, especially from the structural biology perspective, I find those very interesting. And just on the literal folding, DNA folding for some of the the transcription factories that we've talked about and the transchromosomal regulation and things of that nature. I'm like, okay, so we have these little equivalents of springs here that are enabling this folding to be, it expands, it contracts. There's always different. I'm dumbing it down. There's a lot more that's going on with them, but now they're starting to recognize that yet another factor that they have claimed has no purpose actually does have a very specific purpose for some of the things that you were talking about tonight, and from just a basic engineering perspective. And to me, when you really think about that, and that was part of the reason earlier I was asking the question about, like, I wonder what the actual if there aren't significantly more differences between species than they actually take account for. They take into account in regards to doing a overall comparison versus a protein coding gene comparison standpoint.
Well, I'll say this: even in the protein coding, there's significant differences that are functionally important that we're underappreciating. Like with it, with the post-translational modifications, and again, I'm sorry to be so technical, but the proteins in humans that we might share with yeast, we use it in different ways. It has a lot more coding in it for these what they call post-translational modifications, and those are very significant. For the non-coding DNA, there's probably there are definitely differences, and they're functionally significant. One of them, I mean, the thing that's really hard to convey is just the changes between, like, say, a mouse and the rat. Their ERVs are different. I mean, wait, their signs, their transposons are different, but you'd have to rewire a lot of the proteins that actually target those DNA sequences. And I'm sorry I'm being really vague. If I had my pictures, I could show that. And I did once in my talk on junking DNA. See if I can bring it up. I'll share my screen if I could do that.
Yeah. While you're looking for that, yeah, I mean, those factors of and I think something that people also forget, and I talked about this earlier, and Cal's mentioned this many times, but the spatiotemporal variable that applies to not just the fact that a sequence is in the genome, but the physical location of it in the genome in relation to other genes and other regulatory elements that enable its expression has significant bearing on its just basic expression. And I think people really take that for granted and don't think about that, especially when they're following the supposed evidences of evolution. It's like, cool, we got the same gene and it's in a totally different chromosome. Let's think about this for a second, folks. The outcome is probably different, or it may have the same base function, but it can have multiple variables in terms of outcomes that dramatically modify the ultimate outcome.
So I was telling them if I don't know how this just, I mean, I really didn't want to be a total jerk, just not, but I wanted to say I can't, I didn't know how to tell him that some of what he's saying is just like unbelievable. And the thing is actually trying to demonstrate it and show that it's not credible. But when I was showing these loops here, this loop won't form correctly if your signs are not, if these transposable elements are not in the right spot. I'm just like, I don't know how I can be any clearer. A biology professor ought to know that this is bad. That if you're just throwing things around and you're going to get randomly shaped loops, that's not good. We know that there's disease implicated in this. So I don't know that how you could say that this is non-functional. The benefit is now that I'm going to stop sharing is he said all these things. I have an opportunity to go back and challenge him on this and say, that's just not going to work. And so maybe having a round two will give me a second chance. But, I don't know.
Maybe if he hears it a second time, maybe he'll think about it or something.
I mean, I tried to, I showed this diagram earlier, and I was trying to convey how bad their notions of fitness are. And I don't know how evolutionary biologists can still be clean. I'm going to do another screen share. I'm sorry about that, John.
Oh, no problem.
thought, this, let's see, it's the fitness one. Yeah, here we
Tell
go.
you what, while you're looking at that, Emo, you apparently did not pay attention to our two separate hour-long conversations on the same day, because we addressed some of these things that you're still bringing up, and if you want to keep clinging to your worldview, that's fine, man. But a lot of this stuff's already been addressed. Now, go ahead, Sal. Got some Dumb and Dumber. Love it.
I mean, I'm just like, how can you have a theory where you're trying to say this is, dumber is more evolutionary fit? And just like,
That's a good one.
yeah, I was trying to convey that this is a very bad definition of how you define fit. This is not how you would define fit, kind of in the medical or engineering sense. So, I don't know.
Well, the other thing you have to account for, too, in my opinion, is you still have to decide why the previous version was not the necessary optimal, because there is no, I'm talking about in terms of natural selection, because there is not the new beneficial mutation has or outcome has not yet occurred. So how do you have any relative advantage in terms of fitness if the new function doesn't exist yet? You think that would be being construed as an error in recombination, but that's kind of a side point. But the to me, the other component that really has to be, in my opinion, really needs to be addressed is just the sheer fantasy land you have to be living in to think that a protein like Titan, for example, which is 33,000 amino acids in length. Like, I want to know how you remotely conclude that could ever form without it being a completely directed process. I mean, that one is, there's just, to me, there's no plausible conclusion you can reach that one could somehow happen.
Yeah.
33,000 amino acids? Come on, let's get real.
So I think the problem is the thing that when I showed this diagram, that's not necessarily me making that up. Evolutionary biologists who are really smart have conceded this is a problem. And then the few that concede it, like Lewontin, they're sort of forgotten, and everyone keeps just reusing the same old bad definition of fitness. Because the thing is they're using this definition of fitness on the right to argue that this sort of fitness happens naturally. That's not very honest. That's really bad. And, I think is that I know that the literature, I got this from existing literature. This isn't an original thought, that other people have seen that this is a problem. Now, with regard to the 33,000 amino acids, when I was showing the ion channel, and we talked about this is only like what, maybe not even 1,000 amino acids, but you have 4 segments. You have to make 4 copies, and they have to connect together. I don't know how that can be done without foresight. That would take a lot of trials to even get close.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with like the helicase. I mean, helicase is 1,000 amino acids, but the same thing you're talking about, like, not only does it have to copy, it also has to fit perfectly, and it has to have the power cell components in the right spot for the appropriate action. I mean, when you really start to think about, hey, we're not just talking about this stuff in theory anymore. Let's talk about this in real real practical application of what has to all be in place. And you basically have no margin for error. And when you think about that in terms of, hey, for this to exist, you have to have had no margin of error for something like the helicase, which is a recognized base component for the breakthrough requirement. And I mean, to me, when you really just start to think about that in a truly analytical perspective of, do you actually think this is plausible? That all of these things could happen?
Yeah.
And
The cell would be dead. There's no natural selection at that point because the cell's dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
And then to me, when you have to start factoring in the known enzymes that are required for some of these different elements just for the synthesis process. You know, you should really start to add all these pieces up. And I was reading some stuff earlier on how, like, even in like the protein synthesis, there's like 90 sub-functions that are happening during every time an amino acid is being, the polypeptide is being formed, there's like 90 sub actions that are also happening to result in that polypeptide. I was reading that, I was like, holy crap, that's nuts. And then I was like, function. I mean, like, there are sub actions that were happening, you know, pH level changes, all these different things that were occurring at the same time. And if those don't happen, then you have a failed bond occurring in the protein synthesis. And to me, when you really start to think about those pieces, like, okay, so I've got something that is not even remotely rational to conclude could happen by itself in the formation of a necessary component. Then I have to account for all these sub-variables that have to also be in alignment and happen correctly. And then I have to factor in, they all have to be, you know, and then you have the homochirality problem and all these different things. And then you go back to, wait a minute, I also had to have originally had the appropriate genetic sequences ready. I mean, and as you know, Sal, that's not even touching the actual list of simultaneous functions that have to be in existence and acting in synchronicity to result in something that we take for granted now with, there was an mRNA formed. Like, we take that for granted. But when you really start to think about it, it's
well, it might be worth going back and reviewing the debate where he said this is a retroviral insertion that was important for embryonic development. And it's just like, if it's essential for embryonic development and it wasn't there in the first place, I mean, isn't there a good chance the embryo is just going to be dead? I mean, so, I mean, there are things that we can go back in the debate and think about. So if we do have a second round, I mean, it'd be worth talking. I mean, he had some good points. He really wanted to talk about H1N1 and yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just a little tired, so I'm a little bit all over the place.
no, that's okay.
This is why origin of life is so much easier to talk about, because you don't, the variables they're not so many open-ended questions with the origin of life, because it's, there are parts of the cell that have to be there or it's dead. It's just really easy, just really easy. For things like genetic entropy, where, someone can lose a few IQ points and they're still alive, it's it's not quite as cut and dry an argument, so it's harder. Where we could clearly lose a few functional things, and the creature keeps going. So,
yeah, he was talking some about equilibrium.
Oh, here, call me emo. No, Sal, organisms without ERV develop just fine. Do you think a human being without its ERVs is going to develop just fine, especially the sections that are critical for embryonic development? I'm glad he challenged me on that.
Yeah, he could come in if you want.
So that sort of woke me up when somebody tries to call me out on that. See, now I'm being a little bit mean, because he's challenging. He's saying that organisms without ERVs can live.
All right, let's.
That woke me
Okay,
up.
okay, Emo. If you've got the cojones, I'm about to send a link.
Yeah, he was talking about equilibrium before, and to me, if there's real, true equilibrium, that would result in dysfunction. It seems.
Does James have the
Oh,
cojones to
Jennifer's
come in
here.
here?
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Mountain Man
Hey,
James.
thanks for visiting us, James.
Hey, James, the greatest line ever from any debate I've seen. Jesse Lee Peterson, beta. That was the,
What was that?
so Jesse Lee Peterson took on Professor Dave, and during their debate, Professor Dave was so out of his league in the context of anything else. Like, okay, talk about chemistry, cool. Do not come in and talk about politics and like societal issues. He was so ignorant, it wasn't even funny. But throughout the debate, Jesse Lee Peterson would just be like, Dave, you're a beta. Call him a beta male, just like that. Be like beta. It's kind of turned into a line ever since then. If you pay attention in the live chats over on MDD, SFT might tell you be like it's a joke, but sometimes it can be both an insult and a joke at the same time. But oh, praise! James has called you a beta.
I'm an alpha. I'm just kidding.
James, you want to come on, buddy? I know you've been working so hard, being all looking like a supervillain with your special new lighting and your custom lights. It's
Yeah. Hey, thanks for hosting us on such short notice, James. I appreciated the exposure. So
yeah, it was a good time. I tell you what, I got to give James mad props. So I started paying attention to his channel like last November, I think, and he was at he had just tipped 9,000 subscribers, and now he's at almost 22,000. I mean, you gotta give good old James some serious credit for.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Having this, I think his channel is officially into the snowball effect, and hopefully we'll be getting some. He's already starting to get some seriously big names coming on. So
Yeah.
doing some awesome time with the scheduling and everything, getting
Praise is probably the biggest name out there. I'm just kidding, guys.
No, it's always fun. It's amazing. I checked out the T Jump and Dillahunty and whoever they took on. I think there was almost 1,000 people watching that one. And tonight, your debate, Sal, there was it was up over 300 at different stages throughout the debate.
Yeah, and the more nerdy we got, and when Erica didn't show, just we're going to keep losing people. So,
well, I think there are a whole bunch of betas that love MDD that I think they have a serious crush on Erica, and they wish that she would become their mistress and just tell them how to think. So, all those betas wants America. I know they were having a serious meltdown, not being able to get a piece of their Erica, but she's a very nice girl. Disagree with her on most things, but she's a nice, very nice person.
Don't you have a debate with her coming up this Sunday with SFT, or is that something else?
No, this Sunday, me and SFT are taking on Fight the Flat Earth and Team Skeptic.
Oh no! Okay.
Yeah, that would. I was telling everybody that's watching, you're probably not going to want to miss that one because those two suckers think that they're alphas, and they're about to go up against some true alphas.
They're gonna get buzzsawed, and they're gonna go off this typical evolution jargon, stuff evolves over time. You're gonna get that stuff, so get ready for that.
We're gonna get the standard talking points. But what's funny is, and I'm just gonna say this out loud because they're not gonna check this out. I think it'd be funny. I have every intention of comparing them to flat earthers. I'm really hoping that will trigger them. I think it's going to be funny. Can you imagine Fight the Flat Earth if I'm accusing him of being the equivalent of a flat earther, he's gonna flip, guaranteed.
That's funny. You troll them a little bit because they troll a lot of people when they come in there.
No, they're well. The thing is, I've watched some of their debates and this stuff. I don't think they'll be ready to take on me and SFT. I mean, SFT's got a gigantic knowledge stack. I've got some of his and some of the things he doesn't, and vice versa. It's those two aren't going to be able to. They won't be able to hang. I don't think.
Yeah. I would like to see some big name evolutionists have a debate with, anybody who
PZ
can.
Myers was hanging around. I'd love to see Sal and PZ Myers. Yo, James, set that up.
No, he refused to debate. Same thing with Richard Dawkins.
PZ Myers
Refuses to debate us.
Wow.
That's
Solid
what the
weapon.
thing is. I think they're just strangely quiet, because I think this is a snowball effect. They're just getting overrun with all this information that's coming out.
Yeah, I'd tell you a debate I would pay to see would be Stephen Meyer versus Matt Dillahunty.
Oh,
Meyer would
not
absolutely
Dillahunty.
annihilate Dillahunty.
Oh yeah, but Dillahunty just goes off on rabbit trails. I mean, we wouldn't even be debating on intelligent design anymore. It'd just be about.
No, I don't mean on intelligent design. I mean philosophy.
Oh, okay.
That
might be better.
Yeah, Meyer would own Dillahunty on philosophy. Just own him. But yeah, on intelligent design, yeah, I can understand why Dawkins would not want to take on Meyer on intelligent design. It would be all I gotta say is, if I ever took on Dawkins, it would be like, dude, do I need to play the clip of you talking about how it is like a computer tape and a computer code? Well, let me now explain to you all of the additional variables we've discovered that further cements your observation as being 100% correct. And now, with a straight face, I would like you to tell me that you believe that this could occur purely by accident, and with that, through an undirected process. Go.
Yeah, because we need to be like Elijah and say, let's see whose God is the real God, or see whose truth is the real truth.
Yeah,
and then if it's
pretty good too.
And if it's not true, if evolution's not true, you got to take it out of the school system and stop teaching that nonsense.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Jungle. What did you say, Praise?
I said Douglas Axe is pretty good too. I like him, and Dempsey. I think they're all really good philosophers.
Yeah. I'd say that one of the things I've always found interesting about Axe, he's a good speaker. Just that whole premise of the functional DNA ratio, 110 to the 77th, in terms of functional versus non-functional. I mean, when Nobel Prize-winning chemists validate that, hey, I might not agree with you on everything else, but I can't disagree with your position on terms of the functional protein ratio. I mean, it's like, I agree with you on that. And they literally say, like, in his book as a review. And you think about that, of not only do you have to deal with the just completely insane improbabilities just of them that number fitting in the right order, it's also got to be the sequence of a functional protein. I mean, what? I mean, to me, would you really start to contemplate what is actually being argued in terms of, yes, this happens by undirected process. No intelligent agent is required. Life exists, therefore it's one. I mean, like, okay, cool, man. That's awesome. I have a car in my parking lot too, and it exists. Therefore, cars exist. I mean, you could come up with a law of large numbers probability equation that says, it is within the realm of possibility that a car could form itself. Like, what? Okay.
With infinite possibilities, and that's the definition of God.
And I'd say something else. Sal, I imagine you probably thought about this before. I was contemplating this earlier. So the accepted window of time that resulted in the first form of life per the evolutionary timeline is between 200 million and 500 million years. I'm like, okay, so why the hell do we always hear about these billions and billions of years when for the most complicated and the least likely element of life to have occurred, and the one is the most difficult to answer and you don't have an answer to by your own admission, you're arguing that what you're claiming happened after all of that, which in theory would be easier, took billions of years. Somehow, the one that has the most unlikelihood of occurring happened in the shorter window of time? Get out of here, man. Come on. Let's actually think about this. Like, who is making arguments of incredulity here? Oh, wait, mine are justified because you're claiming that something that there hasn't been enough time in our universe to have occurred to even come close to accounting for, the improbability of one of the elements that's required. Not all, just one. You don't have enough time to account for it. But I'm the one who is, making God of the Gaps arguments. Sal, Praise, all of us, we're the ones making God of the Gaps arguments? Really? Let's analyze your argument here for just a second and see which one of us is living in a fantasy land.
See, people are invoking naturalism. That means they think it should happen naturally. It shouldn't be an exceptional event. I mean, that's kind of how I define something natural. It should reproduce itself easily. It's not supposed to be an event that almost would probably never happen in the lifetime of the universe. That's not natural.
No part of it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No part of it can happen naturally, not to mention all the, billions of parts that have to all fit together, No single part. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
Oh, so you're saying that it all has to happen at the same time, which I agree with, if that's what you meant.
Yep, and consecutively, like you have to have one after the other, after the other, after the other, and they just, it's not just one, and it's all the different organisms. They all happen at the same time in the same place,
Hang on, Emo. I know you just didn't try to use that number as a remote comparison to what we're talking about now. 1 in 400 trillion? Oh, dude, you do not understand the numbers that we're talking about here, man. Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
Yeah, and that's small. The other thing is the proper application of statistics into these questions is what we call about. We're trying to describe certain outcomes in terms of expectation. So the origin of life is a violation of statistical expectation. So we don't expect, for example, that 500 fair coins randomly flipped will be all heads. And so that's kind of, that's what we mean by statistical improbability. It's very far from what we would expect that would be normal. The expectation is 50% of the coins will be head if they're heads, if the coins were flipped, not 100%. And so these are the statistics we're talking about with the origin of life. We don't expect that these chemicals would be coordinated in that way. And one of the aspects of those statistics is what they call the homolinkage, where we have all the components of, like, say, the DNA linking together correctly and having the right kinds of sugars, the right chirality linking in a way that will create, like, say, a double helix or any sort of long DNA strand that could actually be read.
Yeah, this is, I just want to put this in context. So, according to a peer-reviewed scientific paper published in Science magazine in 2016, Design and Synthesis of a Minimal Bacterial Genome. In their best approximation to a minimal cell, it has 531,000 base pair genome that encodes 473 gene products. yada yada yada. Encodes for 438 proteins. Let's see where that math got to. Anyway, let's see. It was okay. So we arrive at a probability of 1 in 10 to the 350th power for all the things that would be needed for the recognized, agreed upon, simplest form of life. So even if you want to argue that supposedly these things all happened, one at a time, at some point they all have to exist simultaneously in the exact same geographic location. There is absolutely no way around that argument, period.
Right.
You cannot escape the fact that it has to be in the same place at the same time, period. Now, the reason I joke about, it's 1 in 400 trillion or whatever you said, Emo, is the recognized total particles in the universe is 10 to the 80th power. 10 to the 80th. In terms of the simplest form of life, we're looking at 1 in 10 to the 350,000th power. Okay, let's just consider that for uno momento. And then in terms of the total number of chances for the entire, and this is for every action that has taken place in the entire universe per the evolutionary timeline, you only have a grand total of 10 to the 143rd total actions that have occurred in the history of the entire universe, not on the planet Earth, in the entire universe. So back to my point I was making a few minutes ago in regards to, hey, you've only got a 200 per your timeline. You've only got a 200 to 500 million year window of opportunity before you guys argue the first form of life existed. So I'm pretty sure that the whole point that we're making is the point that is also recognized by people like Kunin and a variety of other staunch atheist folks who are still clinging to abiogenesis. They freely admit, in their own writings, that the improbability of it is so far beyond. What was the term you used? The technical term, Sal? Statistical
Expectation.
And then you have to look at like Dembski's, was it law of small chance? It's anything above 1 in 10 to the 150th power is
universal probability bound.
Yeah. Was that the technical? I forget the.
That wasn't, and it's not just Dembski. That was computed by Seth Lloyd, who's a respected scientist. So, but the question I'll always pose to these people is, how remote does something have to be before you think it's a miracle? And sometimes you'll get a straight answer, and it's like, I have no threshold. It's just, no matter how odd how improbable it is, they're going to refuse to call it a miracle. And at least that's an honest answer. But there's it's just like, give me a number when you're going to accept it. It was probably a miracle of God. And some people will not, they'll say, well, there's no number. It's like, okay, I'm glad we settled that.
That's the reason why they have to appeal to infinite bubble universes.
Yeah. So someone was really direct with me, and I was actually shocked. I asked Tracy Harris, who's Matt Dillahunty's co-host. I said, if you were healed in the name of, say you were blind and you were healed in the name of Jesus when someone prayed for you, would you follow him the rest of your life? She said no. And it's like, okay, at least you're honest.
Yeah, see, that's a standard response you hear from them. That's like one of Dillahunty's favorite type of lines. I think he's passed it on to a bunch of the other atheists, or a lot of other people in the atheist community. Of no, I don't think so. I would think I was hallucinating, or whatever it might be. And it's like, so you think you're now hallucinating that you went from blind to having sight?
Yeah.
Okay, or hey, you had your road to Damascus experience. No, I was definitely hallucinating, or whatever it might be. I forget who's the guy that hosts Trinity Radio. He was talking about this in relation to Dillahunty and T-Jump, actually. And the whole premise was, okay, if you're standing in front of an ocean, you've got a giant army coming at you, and somebody says, in the name of Jesus, or you insert whatever God it is, and the ocean literally opens up in front of you after you've said this, are you actually going to think that this is not a supernatural act? Like that something outside of the natural forces made this happen? If an ocean parted in front of you, and if your response to that is no, that wouldn't make me believe, then either A, you're just a straight up liar, or B, you are living in such a fantasy land that when that time, if you did experience something like that, you would probably collapse and, go into a complete, you'd probably faint because you couldn't believe this was happening in front of you. But I mean, those kinds of objections just crack me up. It's like, do you actually take that seriously?
I personally do. I do take them. You know why? Because that's the way the Pharisees behaved. Exactly. They're seeing miracles in front of their eyes, and they're,
Yeah.
And I see the same attitude. But I think I was just so shocked when Tracy Harris told me she wouldn't follow Jesus. I was thinking, so you're blind. You're a blind beggar. That's the blind beggar in John 9. You have really not much hope for future prospects for anything. You don't know where your next meal's coming from. You don't know who, you're just kind of dumped on the street. You can't see a thing, and you're just crying out. And then someone comes along and gives you eyesight.
Yeah.
And you're not, and you're just gonna walk away. And I'm just like, okay, there's no point, because nothing will convince you. You've just admitted it. Nothing will ever convince you. I mean, why should I expect someone like that to think the origin of life is a miracle? Because they just admitted, even if a miracle happened right in front of them, they're going to say no. I'm just like, okay.
I often wonder if, a lot of the academics who are, they're at, with the knowledge that's now available to them, even more so than somebody like myself. Like, the probability, if you are a professor at a major institution, you've probably, just through your institution, you don't have to pay for it. You get access to the journals, right? Or at least most of them, right? And it's like, there's massive amounts of evidence that contradict your position, or if you look at it from a broader scope, then the reasonable conclusion is obvious. If you look at it from a big picture, if you're going to argue it from a one bullet point rather than the entire argument, or look at the evidence from a broad perspective, then you're completely missing the entire point. It's like, cool, there's a mosaic, and you're looking at one stone that makes up this mosaic, and you refuse to take 3 steps back and look at the gigantic mural that's as the result of this mosaic. And it's to me,
Yeah.
it's a conscious refusal to. At this point, I think people have reached not for all, but for some and many, that especially in academia, I think it's starting to become a conscious refusal to accept the obvious.
Somebody was asking me about a rock rolling down the hill. That would be like one piece in the mosaic.
Right. So Emo's asked, what would convince you guys of evolution? I'm assuming he means evolutionary thought. Praise, you want to jump on that one? And then Jungle, then Sal?
The evolution of eukaryotes. And I've asked evolutionary biologists. I'll show you a diagram that I show them in the debates over in 30 seconds. Because not just evolution of eukaryotes, I'm talking about evolution of chromatin. And let's see, remodeling. So what I would do is I would go to them and I said, well, I'm more inclined to believe, I'll say this one sort of would break me. I said it would take more faith to, hang on, I'll share my screen if that's okay, John.
Yeah.
to believe this can evolve from a system that didn't have. I said, okay, you tell me how that evolved. The debate's over in 30 seconds. They don't even want to answer. So this is the chromatin here. So this is the DNA that winds around the histones here. And if there's a double-stranded break, so if the DNA is just kind of severed because, say, UV radiation came along and cut it, all this machinery has to come in here to repair it. And this is unique to things like eukaryotes that have chromatin, maybe a few archaea. And I'm just like, you miss one piece and this isn't going to be viable. I mean, that's the end of the species right there. if you don't get this right, because all of this is a very concerted ceremony. And I said, that's really just hard for me to believe that could evolve from a system that didn't have all this machinery, because the creature would be dead along the way. I just don't see it. And I say, well, tell me how this happened. And they don't even want to say, I don't know. That's the thing that gets me, is when you really catch them, they'd rather not talk to you because they always want to give the impression that they know everything. And they don't want to admit that you caught them on a really difficult question. I'm just like, I'm not asking this as a promoter of creationism. I'm asking this as just as a person. Can you give me a persuasive reason why that should evolve naturally? And I never get that.
No.
So Emo, by the way, Emo, thanks for being a good sport and being in our chat and keeping it alive. So if someone could have explained that to me, I would have given them more credibility. But the more that I kept showing diagrams like this, they would just throw insults. I said, that's kind of interesting. If you had a real answer, why don't you just give me one? Or at least say, I don't know. Why do you have to make it about me and you have to start insulting me and calling me all sorts of names and saying I'm ignorant? And I said, well, that has nothing to do with anything. Why don't you just tell me?
Hey, Praise, isn't that what Sal's describing? Isn't there like a term for that in philosophy?
Yeah, it's an ad hominem.
Yeah, we don't experience that too much, do we?
No.
I always love listening to it. It's like, oh, that's a post hoc, ad hominem. You like start listening to all these. Straw man. Whatever the term is. It's like, I'll tell you the one that cracks me up more than anything. Praise, I'd love to get your opinion on this since you have so much more focus on philosophy. Is it just me, or does, number one, the straw man argument or accusation seem to be surging everywhere? And then two, that I don't think a significant percentage of the people using it actually know what it means.
I agree. Yeah. What it means is what they do is they set up a weaker argument and knock it down and claim victory of the opponent's argument. And that does happen, but not as much as what people purport it to be. How much, like, it's not that frequent as people think it happens. But you're right.
Yeah, because when they want you to describe evolution for them, and they say, "Oh, I don't believe that." I don't know what it is. I don't believe it. But they can't even present what it is they do believe to us.
Yeah. It was cracking me up today. I was dealing with some of those accusations, and I'm like, you do realize I just presented an entire argument with evidence as to why I've reached X conclusion, and your response is straw man.
Right. Yeah. That's just a deflection.
What are you talking about? Do you even know what you're accusing me of? It cracks me up. It's like, just because you don't know whether or not my argument actually is valid doesn't mean that it's not valid.
Well, tell them to demonstrate where you made a weaker version of their argument. Tell them to demonstrate that. Then there goes their stupid straw man. It's like, boom. They're just making stuff up. But that's usually the case. So a lot of people just throw out arguments to make them sound more educated or whatever.
Yeah, but they don't have anything really. If they, if I'm going to believe in evolution, I have to see some evidence of evolution, and I've never seen anyone present any convincing evidence of evolution to me, because they're always showing variation and genetic drift and a whole bunch of things, but never any kind of evolution of instruction that's not there.
Yeah, and I'd say that I was reading a paper the other day about this. I actually posted in one of the comments and from one of my previous videos on the whole significant issues they're starting to discover with the whole phylogeny process. And now that they're starting to do, it was pretty funny, like reading the paper, and they were like admitting, like, oh, so it turns out there's significant incongruity with our results, and man, the differences are amazing when we put in, different assumptions, starting assumptions and stuff on the protein side, and then it gets down into, and then when we have started to do that, now that we've discovered microRNAs and are starting to recognize their significance and whatnot, so we're starting to do the same thing with them. And it's showing an entirely different evolutionary tree from their models. So it's like, I'm making these up the top of my head here, but like, okay, for the proteins, on the protein side, then we're more closely related to X. On the microRNA side, we're more closely related to something entirely different. It's like, okay, how do you possibly come to the conclusion that either one of your models is correct if they're saying the exact opposite?
But that's the way it always was, even with the proteins, as we understood them a long time ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general we can categorize things, but there are all these really big anomalies. One that really got me, my professor, who's an evolutionary biologist, he wrote a paper, and he said one of the surprising things is human introns are closer to a plant, Arabidopsis thaliana, than it is to animals like nematodes and fruit flies. I'm just like, yeah, that's kind of problematic. So,
yeah, that would.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. That professor, he's an evolutionary biologist, but I could tell he doesn't really take it seriously. He's not. He'll just throw up the numbers, but he's written some of the best creationist stuff by accident. It was really funny. I'm just like, wow. I said I had a lot of fun studying under him because he made me even more of a creationist after studying evolutionary biology under him. Because he had all these papers. Oh, by the way, he worked for Eugene Koonin. He's one of the top evolutionary biologists, and he wrote a paper on promiscuous domains where he admits that we have pieces of proteins that don't follow common descent. It's like there's all this horizontal, not gene transfer, fragments of genes to be put in the right place. I'm just like, yeah, that's kind of hard to believe.
I would love to say that, yeah, I can prove anything if I have the ability to insert whatever hypothetical fits my model. I mean, you can. That's one of the things that kind of cracks me up when you look at the both listen to the accusations of, we're making pre-assumptions, nothing but pre-assumptions. I'm like, you do realize that the evolutionary models, one of which, such as phylogeny, that you guys rely on extremely heavily to supposedly be proof of your position, is based on assumption. Like there's no way around it. The fundamental foundation of it is assumption, and that this is the outcome. I mean, of course, I can write an algorithm that'll figure out a way to result in this. I mean, starting assumptions. I mean, I don't know how you can actually take some of this stuff seriously when you actually go and look at what was the process that was used, and then you go all the way down the rabbit hole. And look at the foundational components, and it's like, huh, cool. You wrote an equation that has your answer. Great job, guys. That definitely explains something as important as how the heck are we here. Good job. But hey, your studies are repeatable. They're repeatable. That's that's scientific, folks. You can repeat anything if you have the appropriate variables accounted for in your own favor. But that's just me. So Raw Matt just brought up. Let's see. There's a paradox that the claddist of evolution is called taxonomic boundary paradox. I'm assuming that is some of the limits that they're coming across in regards to, are there evolutionary barriers that they're starting to come across? Have you heard anything about that?
No.
For millions of years. Yeah, it is interesting when you start reading some of this, some of the different papers that have come out, especially in like the last 3 or 4 years, and some of the different things they're discovering. You were talking about a minute ago, Sal, of like massive exceptions to the rule, and gigantic exceptions, right? That keep popping up the more and more studies we do. And I think a lot of people don't take into account that we actually haven't even sequenced the genomes of the vast majority of the organisms on this planet.
Oh, that's the other thing. I mentioned change tan when you're talking about the massive incongruities. I'm going to read you an article that she shared with me, and she was looking into it. Because of her position as a professor, even though she's a creationist, it's really cool. She's teaching at a secular university. She can write researchers, and they'll respond to her. And let me see if I could find this. Let's see. Conserved. So this is from, let me give you the reference here. Microbiology Research. Genome Update, the 1000th genome, a cautionary tale. And this was first published in 2010. So this has been known for a while. And this is the headline. Not a single protein is conserved across all. Not a single one. And
Okay, say it again.
Not a single protein is conserved across all genomes. That means every creature has a different set. There's not one universal protein. And
so every single organism so far that's been studied has at least one novel gene.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So you'll have all these organisms, and like say, in fact, she showed me the table. She'll say, look at this. There are 199 that have exactly that same protein. And then there's that one. It's like, where did that come from? So, yeah, we can build all these phylogenetic trees, but what are you going to do about all these strange looking orphans? They're just all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really kind of a funny pattern. Just think about it. Why would selection, they keep talking about natural selection. Why would, they're so different in sequence. It's like, well, then, okay, if they all started out with the same sequence, why is it going to evolve one that's so different?
You're saying if the starting point is so similar, why is and per their argument, it's slight modifications, but then the novel one is like a complete outlier. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's complete outlier.
So okay.
It's a complete outlier, and it's just like, well, it's kind of like if you think they found all these alternative genetic codes. So most life goes by the standard genetic code, but there are like 25 organisms that have a different genetic code. How did that happen?
Right.
How did that happen without killing the creature? I mean, that's not a trivial change. So you're going to have to possibly invoke multiple independent ancestry, but then why do they have so many other parts of them that are similar? There's just all these oddball things that are just saying, just kind of screaming that there's not common descent. So there are
Well,
two things about evolutionary theory. You can assume common descent, but do you need miracles along the way? That would be more like Michael Behe and Stephen Meyer. But then you have all these oddball things that say, well, maybe not even assume common descent. So,
well, in line with that, what you just said there kind of sparked a thought in me. Earlier today, actually, I was reading a paper on, as I'm sure most of y'all know, any codon differences in mitochondria are often a strong talking point in the evolutionary arsenal. At least I think so. And this paper, it's pretty recent. They were discussing how they're starting to recognize that synonymous codon substitutions actually did have negative outcomes. And here in not every instance does it, but in a significant portion of them they do, with the structural the end structure of the protein being generated. I mean, they're just going through all the lists and things, Sal, you and I have talked about, like translational pausing and those different pieces, and then the post modifications that also occur. And they're like, wow, we're actually starting to discover that there is significant evidence that what we called synonymous codon substitution actually is not necessarily, it might be on the surface be synonymous substitution, but in the end result, it's not. All the way to the level of causing the protein to not be formed, even with a synonymous codon substitution. And I thought that was extremely relevant. And I think I say that just on its own, as well as the point you were making, right? Of it's got an entirely different code. If we're looking at what we're discovering now is, a single codon, synonymous codon substitution can be a endpoint for a function, then doing a complete syntax overhaul is not even a remotely viable. There's not an option for that.
yeah, Dawkins blew a gasket when Craig Ventnor said he doesn't believe in common descent because of that. And Dawkins said, I'm really troubled that you're saying that. And I'm just like, Craig Ventnor is like so much more senior than you are. You're not in a position to question him.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
Yeah, hey guys, we can't explain one code. We've got like another one we have to figure out. I mean, oh wait, it still does protein synthesis and follows the rest of the logic rules with a different code. I mean,
well, which means, you're going to have to change all the genes. And that's the problem with eukaryotic proteins. Once they have to go to compartments, they have to get these little tags on them to tell them postal addresses, for lack of a better word. We call them localization signals. And it's like, how do you reformat all these proteins with new addresses all at once? Because if these proteins aren't going to the right location in the cell, the creature's dead.
Well, and that doesn't even stop at the location in the cell. It could be a different part of the body, right? I mean, it could be being exported to somewhere else, depending on what it is.
Yeah, there are all these other problems. So what's another problem? I'm kind of climbing up the stairway of life. The eukaryote evolution is just a monstrous problem. So what's the next one along the way? It'd be meiosis. The development of male and female. That's always been a problem. But meiosis is like, well, why does the cell split off half its chromosomes and then later on join them? Because it's not going to be really good if you start splitting off the, if you have two copies of a chromosome and you just split it off, that may not, and you need to I have to think about it, but I know it's a severe problem. Meiosis is not a trivial problem.
No. Matt just made a great point. They actually, I wasn't paying attention. I was listening to you. They discovered the AQR gene in Denisovan that is no longer in humans. it was used in detection of viruses and regulation of antiviral immune response. More proof of genetic entropy. Yeah, I've thought about that too. I think it was Neanderthal. They the DNA they've been able to find of it, I think had like 5% more than us. I mean, you got to think about that. Of how does something that is previous have more than modern humans?
Top down.
Doesn't make any sense. If we've kept all this junk, why did that 5% of junk just somehow disappear? Maybe it had, as if Matt's making the point of, hey, there was functional genes in that sucker that are now no longer available to us and had a beneficial element to it. Why is it a remotely reasonable conclusion per the evolutionary model that something that should have passed natural selection test has managed to vanish as we're going through undergoing all these supposed improvements?
There's yet another thing with the on the stairway of evolving things. I think animal evolution is really tough because so much has to be there for it to work. And certain animals, especially the vertebrates, you know, they have a digestive system. It's like, well, yeah, how do you live if all the pieces aren't there? There is something interesting also with evolution and nerve cells. How do you evolve a nerve cell? I mean, what good is a half-formed nerve? I mean, it's kind of sad when someone has their, part of their spine broken and the nerve is severed. It's just useless. Mm-hmm. So what good of it? What good is our nervous systems if they're not all complete? So I have a hard time. Oh, that's the other thing. I looked up papers. All of them say that the evolution of nerve cells is very problematic because a half-formed nervous system is no good.
Well, what
if you have optical sensing nerves and they're not connected to your brain?
Right. Well, I've thought about that too. I think this goes back to people being so desperate.
Hey, John, I gotta get going, but thanks for the invite, man. I really enjoyed this. Great talk.
Oh man, thanks, Praise.
Yeah,
thanks for helping us all out, man.
Yeah,
over at the SFT channel.
Kingdom of God, for sure. All right, guys, later.
Yeah, thanks for your support, man. Take care. Man, I appreciate you guys. It could get kind of lonely out there.
Well, man, in context, you're talking about the nerve cells. I think I love that point because I've thought about that quite a bit myself. And as a sidebar, I think this is a portion of why the atheist evolutionists are so desperate to avoid the obvious, not just analogies, but direct comparisons to electrical engineering, electrical systems, just technology in general. It's like, when you're getting into nerve cells, folks, you're not talking about like synonymous. We're talking about direct electric signals, impulses that are being translated via chemical process, but there's still, it's literal electric impulse that's being transmitted. There's circuitry that is enabling this to occur. And you're trying to argue that this is not circuitry when it's clearly circuitry and it's designated as circuitry, and you can do a diagram of it and it looks the exact same. And in many ways, exponentially more advanced than what we come up with right now. Like, come on, let's think about this, folks.
This is a diagram very similar to my textbook when I was studying neuroscience.
Hey, Sal, can you zoom in on that a little bit?
Sure. I'm sorry that the text is a little grainy. Now, if I was an electrical engineer, and had a lot of circuit diagrams that look kind of like this. And the thing is this is also a nice way to represent the parts of a nerve cell. So if you think this is the membrane here, the membrane of the cell, and so you have all these electric circuits between the outside of the cell and the inside. This is how neuroscientists represent the electrical flow. And I talked about the potassium ion channel. Here it is right here. See, they even have something here, the potassium, the sodium, and the potassium ion channels. And one of my professors in neuroscience, he had no biology background. They hired him because he's an electrical engineer. And that was the right skill set to be able to understand how nerves work. And I said, isn't that kind of cute? You know, that's the skill set that they need to understand this. Oh, Emo weighed in. I'm an electrical engineer too. So what happens when you start cutting wires to your system?
You know what? Okay, so Emo, we are not going to discuss. I will kick you off if you want to go on your stupid cauliflower deal. We're not discussing that tonight. We can have another discussion on that too. If you want to argue about electric circuitry and nerves and such with a electrical engineer, I will let you come on and do that. But none of the other standard talking points from me tonight. I'm too tired for that.
So again, you know, there's the other thing, the shape of the nerve cell. And I think I have this right. I need to check with speed of sound. Your sciatic nerve is actually formed by cells that are as long as 1 meter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm just like, how does it? I mean, that's, you know, we tend to think of a cell as kind of like a blob. This thing is just like this long thread-like structure. I said, that's pretty difficult for one cell to manage it.
Yep.
To extend its to extend the cell surface for 1 meter.
Mm-hmm.
That just boggles the mind that it could coordinate for that far. How does it? You know, I began to look at papers. I don't think there's a lot of description of how a nerve cell knows how far to grow.
No, I wrote about that, and that you're 100% correct. They have no idea. None.
I mean,
it just does. It finds a way. And I know one of the things I was reading, they were so. I remember reading about it, they were so surprised. It was just like it snakes its way through and then finds a position and just stops and then like has tails that go off to create additional connection points. And I was reading through that, I was like, wow, this is amazing.
I mean, come to think of it, let's say it doesn't go the full meter and it just quits. It's not going to control the muscles.
Right.
I mean, how's it? There are all sorts of problems.
Well, I mean, the same logic that you're talking about there also applies to the proportions of your limbs. I mean, why do for example, like your finger proportional ratios of your fingers and toes and your arms, why do they stay the same? Like there's no known reason for them to grow to a certain end point, as well as maintain a set, obviously outside of, mutations, ironically, and disorders. But outside of that, if you're normal, that ratio is going to be maintained from the moment you're born till the moment you die. But through development, what keeps that ratio in place?
Yeah.
I mean, that's stuff you really have to think about, of like, where is this? And that's why when you start to really contemplate those sorts of elements to life, I'm like, you're going to say that protein the protein coding genes are the only thing that are controlling things like where and how far nerve cells grow? and how the ratios are maintained. That's 3-dimensional control. You can't escape the 3D control requirement, right? And then the one something that really gets me is, and this applies to the vast majority of, pretty much all eukaryotes, but the premise of being able to process depth perception. I mean, when you really think about that from a computation standpoint, things that we take for granted, like going up and down the stairs, and just the sheer amount of mathematical calculations that are being done in your subconscious, it's mind-bending to me. As an engineer in your background, what are your thoughts on that? What I just said there, of like, we take for granted the computational power that's going on.
We absolutely have up until now, because now that we're studying it, we're sort of bewildered. One section of the book I'm writing, I hope it gets through. I said, we take it for granted that a bird can navigate from point to point.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the distances that they travel, our best scientists could not. It took millennia before we figured out how to travel those distances with such accuracy. Like crossing, some birds cross continents,
Mm-hmm.
will cross over the ocean. Any pilot will tell you that is something you do not want to do without modern navigation, and definitely they don't want to do it with just a magnetic compass. And I mean, if you think about it, if you're encountering a strong wind, you may not be able to calculate your actual speed, your ground speed, unless you can see the ground. But how do you calculate speed looking at water? If you look just down at the ocean, it's like, gee, I really don't know exactly how fast I'm going, and I better be really precise in my speed estimates, because otherwise I'm going to get lost and I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
We have these birds that cross continents, and it boggles. It's starting to be like, how do they do it? Because even until the 60s, we had to use like stellar charts.
Mm-hmm.
There's some that would actually, it surprised me, like in World War II, they would have kind of their internal navigation, but they always had to update it by bringing out their charts to look at the stars and get a good fix on their position. And they also needed really good clocks. So, and they had some really good cartographers. I said,
some on the fly math to make sure they were based on speed, starting point, proximity.
Yeah. And these birds have none of that. And they're able to do stuff that we're never able to do. And this goes to your point. We've taken it for granted until we realize we've been trying to solve the same problem that's already solved inside of their internal organs. I mean, this is like the way that I try to describe the problem. It's like, why don't you try to build an autonomous vehicle that can do all that the bird navigates? Just try.
Yeah.
And you'll see all the problems you have to solve.
Well, just on a day-to-day observation, you're driving down the street in your neighborhood. Somehow the birds manage to take off and fly in front of your car, and then and then pull up or something, just fly over the top of your hood, or just miss you. And I was thinking, I almost ran them over the other day. It didn't. As usual, didn't hit the bird, even though it was waiting until the last second to take off in the middle of the street. And I was thinking about this from the processing perspective. I'm like, somehow this sucker knew, based on my speed, his launch velocity, force requirement, all that kind of stuff, how to take off at the absolute last second to avoid getting run over. And when you just think about the physics of that,
yeah,
and the math that has to be going on, I mean, part of what makes me think about this sort of thing, like when I was a pretty hardcore basketball player when I was a kid, and fast forward to professional life, I ended up having a client who had built out a technology that it's now in pretty much every NBA team. There's several thousand D1 schools have this tech now as a fundamental. But him and another physicist, he was the business side, and this other guy who's a physicist, had been watching his daughter play basketball, in the front yard, or like in the driveway. And he was watching her. She was missing, having a hard time. And he's like, man, I bet I could figure out what the perfect entry angle and depth would be mathematically. And then if I could let me see if I can figure out a way to track this and all those guys. So they ended up building out this tech that you could like mount, and it would in real time track the exit or the launch and entry depth and angle of your basketball shot, and then like report back to you. And if the optimal angle is 45 degrees, 10 inches, 45 degree angle, 10 inches entering, 10 inches inside of the hoop. And they built different versions, expanded it out, but that really got me thinking about, the months and months and months that I had spent, or say months, the years I had spent working on my shot and all these kind of things when I was a boy and in high school. But then you really started to, contemplate, okay, if I'm standing still and doing a set shot, that's one thing. If I'm being able to drive, cut back, jump, get hit, and then recalculate the angle and the force requirement to make a ball go in a hoop. When you actually think about the amount of on-the-fly calculation that's happening in a fraction of a second in order for that whole process to occur and ultimately result in the force being executed through the contraction of my muscle cells in synchronicity, not just one cell, billions, to result in launching a shot at the perfect angle to go in the hoop. I mean, we just we completely take that for granted. I'm dumbing it down. You just think about the stuff you see with the most elite athletes in the world, and just the level of precision they're able to execute these things in. I mean, I honestly don't think that there's a supercomputer on this planet right now that could possibly account for all of those variables in that context. It might be faster and better in a different context, but in that context, I do not think there's a supercomputer that could handle all of. They might be able to calculate the angle and the force requirement, but I don't think it's going to be able to execute all of the other processes that are required to happen in synchronicity for the actual action to take place. Does that make sense?
Yes. That's some of I remember taking an artificial intelligence class, and they were talking about some of the first robots that they tried to get to walk. And they called one of them Shaky because the thing just shook. It couldn't balance itself very well, so it just shook. So they named the robot Shaky because it just, it was having problems keeping balance. It just shook. So they tried to put in an AI or some sort of neural net or something to kind of get it to train how to walk, and it would just kind of just be all shaky when it would walk. Actions that are so smooth for a human being, they tried to put it in a robot, and I think even then they had to have an external power cord to they had to do the computations remotely.
Oh wow!
And then pipe it into the electric motors. So it had the motors, and it had the power source. It had the motors that would move, but the power source and the control had to be all fed in by wire. It wasn't completely self-contained, the first one. And I was like, yeah, that was a pretty hard problem to solve. Or how about something simpler like balancing a broomstick?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, with that, you also have the sheer on-the-fly modifications that have to be happening too, right? To keep it balanced. I mean, we take so many of these things just for granted. It's why the point you were making about the AI. I honestly wonder if people just are ignorant of or just refuse to accept the premise that such a huge aspect of everything that we're doing with computer science is directly derived from biomimicry. I'm just like, what was the original inspiration for machine learning? Oh wait, it was in biology. What was the whole premise of the original premise of computer science? biology. I mean, you extrapolate all these things out, and it's like, oh no, you're comparing it to modern stuff. It's like, no.
And
This
biology,
is a comparison to biology. It's the literal reciprocal of the argument you're making.
yeah. In biology, has solved problems we still are nowhere close to solving. A self-healing, self-assembling machine, we can't.
The best thing we got what the we've got the self-healing tires now that kind of work. Like, what's up, y'all? That's one of the things that always cracks me up about the supposed counterpoints that I get sometimes of, like, if I do any kind of technology comparison, I'd be like, their response is, yeah, well, that technology doesn't replicate itself, and I'm like, yeah, that's what makes my argument that much stronger.
Yeah.
Do you not comprehend this? Yeah. We're adding, who knows what the number of exponential layers on top of the complexity the second you insert self-replication into the equation.
Yeah.
I mean, who even knows what that actually in reality, the extra level of complexity that actually is.
It's basically it's factories making copies of itself, and we don't know how to do that because the way it does it too, and it doesn't have a lot. It does computation in ways that we don't understand.
Yeah.
So
it was interesting in my debate with Ron after yours, where he made the argument that a dual syntax programming language could create itself.
Yeah,
and I'm like, I didn't even, when he actually agreed with that, I'm like, okay, this is another one of those, you could probably come up with a hypothetical where that could happen. But just like with abiogenesis, like, okay, cool, you can come up with a mathematical formula that says, yes, there is a probability of who knows how many zeros, 1. But I really don't know anybody with any sense of real pragmatic plausibility would conclude that could happen.
Yeah.
Even a single syntax is not going to be able to do it by itself. And then I'm like, okay, cool. So was it Facebook or Google shut down their quantum computer because it created its AI was creating its own language. And I'm like, okay, cool. So a quantum system, AI system, can create its own language. Awesome. That's cool. I think that proves my point. Because is there any other scenario without the quantum computer and the AI and the machine learning that's been created by humans? That's the only reasonable scenario where that could occur. I mean,
yeah.
And even then, to the point you're making on the factories, it's like, cool, it can create the instructions. Is it ever going to recreate a quantum computer? I would say no.
Yeah.
But now I know it's getting late. You've been talking for a while, and it's you're on Eastern time, right?
Yeah, I gotta call it quits. But thank you guys for all your support. I really appreciate it. And Speed of Sound and Ron Garrett will be talking to me tomorrow at noon. So on Speed of Sound's channel.
Okay.
I don't know what Michael had me talk about, but I appreciate them. I appreciate talking to him. So we'll be in touch, and maybe we'll have our show sometime. I've been thinking about us having a show. So I was hoping to launch, a little bit of my website today. So,
Okay.
Well, it was great listening to you, Sal.
Yeah, thank you, Jungle Jargon, and thanks for all your support. And it's great seeing you. So thanks to all the listeners too. Take care.
Thanks, Sal. Have a great night, man. Get some sleep.
Thanks.
All right, Standing. So now that you have actually seen the entire debate, you want to come on and discuss. I know you've been on a emotional roller coaster throughout this until you got to the end. Are you ready to come on, or should we call it a night?
We're good. I'm good. I just have to, let's see, tomorrow I got to do something, but I'll do it before I go to sleep.
Yeah, thankfully, I don't have to get up too early tomorrow. But man, I was up at the literal crack of dawn this morning. I was up at 3:30. That was a beast. I think you get some work done. But it's
I
actually,
used to work nights, but I've gotten used to it. I kind of like sleeping during the daytime now. I'm still sleeping in the daytime.
come on, SFT.
Yeah, we're waiting.
No, I mean, my problem is I don't mind sleeping during the day either, but my problem is either way I'm a bit of a night owl, and I do some of my best thinking at night. So if I have to get up early in the morning, I'm just toast. I know at the end of the day, by the end of the next day, I'm gonna be toast because the probability of me being able to actually fall asleep in a reasonable time frame, in relation to my new wake up time, I know I'm toast. Let's see. Oh,
You can't, I guess.
oh man, SFT. Oh, his wife's got him on lockdown. All right. Well, we'll let it slide this time, man. Well, let's see. It's 12:20. Yeah, probably gonna call it a night. Well, Jungle Man, thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you. Glad you're able to see Sal's debate, and I think it was definitely an interesting one. You got any closing words for the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would like to see some high-profile debates, and I don't know if it's going to happen because they don't seem too eager to want to debate anyone. But if we could make that happen, that would be great.
Well, just have to keep getting subscribers and getting the clout, and the email their PR department.
Yeah.
Like, hey, public relations manager, so I can put your client in front of X number of people.
Well, they just think they're so much better than us, and they don't want to stoop to our level of a creationist, you know.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason I've started doing video challenges and calling people out and being like, hey,
Yeah,
you wanna bash me? You wanna talk some trash? Fine, formal challenge. Let's go.
that's it.
Where's your ego? I know a lot of people on our side kind of don't like that style, but I'm like, you know what?
Well,
I think people need to be challenged.
yeah, they've been shoving it down our throats ever since I've been alive. So it's about time they back it up or just stop with the nonsense, you know.
Yep, I would agree with that completely. And I think a lot of them, especially the ones that were on MDD, until, I mean, obviously they always having challenges with SFT and Nephilim Free and, true empiricism, but there wasn't many other real challenges. And I think over the last, this past 6-7 months, quite a few people have started coming out of the woodwork, and now they're starting to face some serious challenges. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I got to actually, I can't just spew talking points and have, my opponent surrender. I mean, it's not
I'm a firm
way it rolls
believer.
anymore.
I'm a firm believer in the more people we can get, the better it is. To be calling people out and calling people for a debate.
Yeah, it's a much different dynamic than what, as you said, for years and years and years they've had. There might have been 1-2 people, maybe 3, but it's not and now, I mean, you've got, folks like Capturing Christianity is doing it much more from the philosophical side, at a high level. Praise doing a lot of stuff on the philosophical side. SFT. I mean, there's so many different folks that are doing. We're fighting them with quality. It's a quality and quantity of substantive arguments that directly fly in the face of and don't just acquiesce to their
Right. And these people that do believe in evolution, need to speak to their teachers, their science teachers, their educators, and really question them on it, and then bring them into the debate to talk to us.
Yeah, before I had to shut down my business for all this madness, I was seriously, and I do not know if it will be reopening, which sucks. But I was seriously considering blowing some money and taking a biology class just for that purpose.
Yeah.
I was thinking back to college of as a kid, I probably wouldn't have. I mean, I had brass cojones back then, but it was more from youthful stupidity than actually having real confidence from a knowledge perspective. But now, as a adult, I think I would get massive entertainment of debating a professor in their classroom. I think that would be priceless. It'd be so much fun.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have pretty good handle on some of the more recent information and genetic studies and stuff. So.
Well, then I live in Nashville, and Nashville, Tennessee. We're actually the healthcare capital of the United States, and most people don't know that, but there's more healthcare companies going on here in Nashville than anywhere else in America. And like the parent companies, like the top level entities, are all headquartered here. And so I've actually had the opportunity, before I got into doing stuff online, I had the opportunity to interact with quite a few. I actually had clients who were like high level cancer researchers and different stuff. And I think back to my conversations with them in the past, and I learned a lot from them just about their research into cancer and stuff. But now when I look back onto that in relation to what I know now and my experience and stuff, and I've had since then I've had some random actually interactions with different folks that are doing human genome research. For example, I talked to a PhD a couple months ago, and I was asking different questions about some stuff, and he was looking at me with, his eyes glazed over. He didn't know what I was talking about. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you're a PhD at one of the premier institutions of it in this subject,
Right.
and you don't understand the position I'm asking you about. Like, I just read a paper on this.
Yeah,
I know this is true. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I just read it on Nature. It's a pretty relevant. There were press releases about the article. It has substance if they did a press release prior to publishing an article.
Yeah.
You don't know about this. Like, this is that kind of concerns me on one side, but on the other, that's kind of why I bring up the points about it doesn't take a PhD to read a paper. And, once you learn the fundamentals, and just, it takes time to start learning this stuff, but after you read them paper after paper after paper, start making sense, you go and Google, what the heck does that mean? Go Google it, read a paper on that. Okay, got that concept. Now you go back, and it doesn't take that long before you're instantly recognizing things, and then also realizing the relevance of what's being referenced. I mean, it's basic education, right? But you're being able to, even without the PhD, doesn't mean you can't understand it.
Yeah, because I was a mechanic, and I'm recently retired as of this month, and I'll have a lot more time to be looking into these, developments in medicine and genetic studies and stuff.
Yeah, that's. I think people then that operate in the theoretical world also don't. I think they have not all obviously, but I think some of them have a slight mental blind spot of the actual real world significance of what they're talking about from a much more theoretical perspective. And like if you were a mechanic, that if part A does not fit part B,
right,
it doesn't work, period. You have to go get the correct part A that fits part B. There's no way around it.
Right. I'm much more on the scientific level, not on the theological level.
Right. Yeah.
It has to work. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way around it. And and then it's like, hey, there's 1,000 parts that all have to fit together. You're gonna be like, what? Number one, I better have a insane instruction manual on how to reverse engineer this and figure out how this worked.
Yeah, it's actually nanotechnology is what it is.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed a lot, which cracks me up, is when I talk about the nanotechnologies that enable life to exist, there are such aggressive and adamant denials of it being nanotech. And I'm like, it's literally nanotech. We're trying to copy this. Like, we're trying to create our own nanotech from the same process.
Yep.
It's called nanotech. It is nanotech. It has moving parts like nanotech. It has, all these, every single component that would be considered technology on the macro level. It has that too. It's just on the molecular level. How does it make any difference in terms of scale? Like, cool. So we took the nano machine, you blew it up to the macro level. Does that mean that it's not still a machine?
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Only a machine if it's big?
I'm wondering about the switching, though. Our switching is accomplished by our choices, our will, and I'm wondering how that would work in a living organism or a nanotechnology thing. Because I think one of the things they were trying to find was a switch. I'm a little bit behind on it now, but they were trying to find different things that you can use in electronics that you could also use in nanotechnology.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, when you really dive into some of the things that that are actively being done in biotechnologies, and the things we've already successfully managed to pull off in terms of hybridization of our type of electronics with the nervous system, for example. I mean, it's like we're literally being able to integrate this and send signals that are readable in a specific format. I mean, and vice versa. I mean, when you think about that, if you can do, okay, cool, you got a receiver, that's one thing. But if you can have a receiver and a sender integration, that's a whole nother level of capacity, number one, but you still have to have the capability on the building the artificial receiver is one thing. Being able for the receptors on the biological side to be able to receive the signal, that level of integration is amazing, in my opinion. But we take things for granted.
Yeah.
Well, man, I think I'm gonna call tonight. I've been up for 18 hours.
Sounds good.
It's time to get some sleep. Appreciate your time, everybody. Everybody, thanks for coming and checking out our live stream, spending time. Appreciate your comments. Hope everybody has a great night. And as you contemplate the things that have been discussed tonight, the amazing intricacies, the nanotechnologies, the information systems, all of the amazing spatiotemporal controls that enable us to exist on the biological level. And before you even start to contemplate the information processing and computation that's done in our subconscious as well as our conscious mind, I hope it leads you down the appropriate rabbit trails that I think are the most logical, plausible, and probable conclusions about our existence and the implications that has on where we come from and what is the ultimate source of our existence. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great night, y'all.